Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team. I would be very careful about slinging stuff. Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
I like football season, and all the things that go with it.
We got the good version of Josh Allen on Thursday Night Football, and that makes the Buffalo Bills extremely difficult to beat. And despite a late rally by Baker Mayfield and the Bucs and some very strange plays late in that rally, the Buffalo Bills end up winning their game, getting their season back on track, and we'll talk about that and more on this Friday edition of the PFF NFL podcast. How's it going, Brad?
It's going great. Yeah, you mentioned we got a good Josh Allen. Still think it's interesting down in the red zone, not really willing to run with him, and, led to the missed fourth down and some bad rushes from Latavius Murray. So probably even more of a ceiling there for that offense, particularly converting down in the red zone.
Yeah, it's interesting. They were talking a lot on the broadcast about how, the narrative in Buffalo had been, we need to run Josh Allen more. Like, why are we not tapping into this incredible skill set that he has? And that it had been a deliberate thing from the offense to try and scale back some of the ask for Josh Allen, and so that he isn't responsible for carrying the entire team. And then even in this game, they ran him a couple of times early, and he got dinged up, and he's getting looked at in the medical tent. And it's like, well, this is the tension, right? Is how much do you tap into these plays versus the risk to your star quarterback, without whom the season is a waste of time, right? Like, if Josh Allen isn't there, forget it. Everybody might as well pack up and go home. But this is part of what makes Josh Allen so difficult to defend. Like, if he is doing that stuff, if he's running the ball, if he's part of the design run game, you don't have good answers for that on defense, but it is rolling the dice every time you do it.
Yeah, and I think the key that you're starting to notice more and more, especially as we've seen them, obviously not yesterday with the loss of Dawson Knox, but, they try to add 12 personnel to their, arsenal. I think they were 31st or 30th or maybe even dead last season in the usage of two tight ends. But teams very quickly have realized they can still just sit in nickel and be fine against the run against this team, even if they do have, a multiple tight end set. So his rushing ability, even just stripping out how good he is at it and everything he adds from a, schematic standpoint, when you have to worry about his legs, maybe keep a spy in for the, opposing linebacker. It's also just, they don't still have any respect on the ground otherwise, and they really can't, force heavier boxes or do different things to get the defense to give them better, more advantageous looks, no matter what they do. So it's almost amplified, Allen's, benefit is almost amplified because of that.
Yeah, and so this was a strange game where the score ends up being quite close, but the Buffalo Bills had this well in hand, and even so, Tampa Bay are in that classic situation of, okay, we're 2 scores down, we need to get 2 different touchdown drives to win this thing. They end up getting the first one through a sequence of bizarre plays and extend it, and then they get the 2-point conversion, right? And so now it's just a 6-point game with that 1 touchdown drive needed to win it, and it ends up being decided on a Hail Mary. But my point being, it looked quite close with the final score and the fact that the Bucs had the game and theoretically were 1 play away, right, from winning it. However, it wasn't really that close. Like, the Bills had their way with them on offense, particularly in the first half, and their defense was just crushing Tampa Bay in the second half when they were trying to execute this comeback, and somehow the drive kept getting extended, or penalties or whatever, and we end up with a game that looks reasonably close.
Interesting, because they kept punting and pinning them deep in their own end zone, and it worked a lot of the time. They did multiple inside the 5, and you knew the Buccaneers, almost had a safety from Baker Mayfield. I thought he was for sure down on that one throw, and he did get it out before his knee came down. But then you're also sitting there being like, all right, Sean McDermott has now punted, 3 times on 4th and about 3, maybe 4 from across midfield. And I get that you have a lot of faith in your defense to not let this Bucs offense score, or at least not score quickly. But it could have, in hindsight, we could have viewed it as a disaster if Chris Godwin catches that ball and we're saying, yeah, the Bills could have just put this game away, but instead just played the field position battle, which did, again, work a couple times during the game. Also, though, have you seen a funnier or just weirder drive than a 17-play, 92-yard drive that took 7.5 minutes with 3 fourth-down conversions, and then both the touchdown and the 2-point were like deflected passes? Yeah. I think it was the funniest drive I've ever seen in my entire life.
It was ridiculous. It's the kind of drive that only Baker Mayfield can be the quarterback for. Like, it made no sense. It had a healthy dose of like Baker moxie, which was in that game throughout. It's like it felt like every play was Baker ad-libbing, shrugging his way out of contact, fighting through stuff, getting the ball out. There was one, I can't remember if it was the touchdown drive or like the final drive where he ends up delivering a pass like out of the grasp of Von Miller, who just, whooped the right tackle, got around him. Baker sort of shrugged off the tackle attempt, tried to like jump over Von Miller's like body on the ground, who like caught his ankle from behind. And Baker's like trying to hop his way out of the contact and just fires the ball out to the flat, ends up being a completed pass. I'm like, that's crazy. That shouldn't have been a catch.
Yeah, I think that was either a tight end or Rashad White, who may have gotten like a first down or a decent chunk gain. I think I remember the exact play you're talking about. Yeah, it truly was bizarre. We did see, I think, Baker, he was under pressure a ton. We have it as 18 of his dropbacks. He completed 6 passes and took 4 sacks, and we've kind of been waiting for that regression. His pressure to sack rate was insanely low so far this season, especially compared to his historical averages. But I actually still do think, even though we are, kind of seeing that reverse a little bit, I still do think he has become a better player under pressure for whatever reason. Him and Dave Canales, and Canales, I don't think, called the greatest game. I mean, you're running the ball a lot, down 2 scores in the second half. But yeah, for whatever reason, I do think we see a little bit less of that, stupidity, or it's probably the wrong word, but some of the Baker magic that we saw in years past. I think he has kind of turned a corner in that regard, even in a game where he did finally take a handful of sacks, unlike the first 6 games of the year for the Bucs.
But it also, watching the game, like, it felt like he had way more sacks than that. Like, it felt like every play he's under siege, getting just annihilated in the pocket. And you look at the sort of numbers at the end of it, you're like, wow, he was actually only sacked that period of time. This felt like a Sam Howell, Daniel Jones type of game where we're going to get like 9 sacks at the end of this thing. And it kind of wasn't. And a lot of that was Baker somehow getting out of a lot of these plays, like the safety or that play we talked about with Von Miller. There was another 4 or 5 of these that maybe should have resulted in sacks and didn't. And that's not to say, every one of them Baker made a positive play out of it, but sometimes there's a positive play in not having the negative play, right? Not the safety not resulting, or the sack for Von Miller not being there, and just getting the ball out of your hands almost regardless of where it ends up.
The thing, right? I mean, we're joking about needing 17 plays in 8 minutes. They basically had a 4-minute offense when they needed to be in a 2-minute offense. But you can pull that off if you don't get yourself in 2nd and 15, 3rd and 15, etc. And they did have some penalties early on in that drive that almost ended it. But yeah, he has avoided some of those negatives. It felt like he could have got, like you said, he could have got sacked 10 times last night, and I think it was only 4 in total. So it's interesting. Like, the offense, obviously we've seen the warts. They just simply cannot run the football, and then it's going to be up and down to where you play a team like Buffalo that kind of sits back in zone and lets you feast underneath, and you don't have the explosives to Mike Evans. Obviously, the touchdown was his 2nd catch of the entire game. Like, I think it's going to be hard for the Bucs to really, move quickly and not do what they did last night. It's tough sledding for that offense right now.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think Baker is still playing pretty well. Like, this is as good as we've seen from Baker Mayfield since, the last good year in Cleveland. And then, obviously, the shoulder injury the following year and the disaster that his career became after that. But this is as close to the good version of Baker Mayfield as we've seen for a while, despite the problems around him. Okay, here's one thing. I've decided it's time. It's starting to annoy me that pass interference simply doesn't count on Hail Marys. Like, when you watch that play, which, by the way, was very catchable at the end, like, that's another play that kind of Baker did well. Like, I thought that play was going to end with him being either under pressure or sacked or hit and the ball never ending up in the end zone. And then somehow he made the right move back there, found himself space, stepped up and delivered whatever that was, a 50-yard, 55-yard strike right to where it was supposed to drop. Now, once it drops there, it's chaos, right? It's all bets are off. The quarterback doesn't control that. But getting it there was an achievement for Baker Mayfield in the first place. And it basically ends up dropping like right to Chris Godwin, who has no idea that that's happening because somebody has attempted to tackle him along the way, and he's busy like spinning, trying to locate the ball. But like when you watch those replays of the Hail Mary and the sort of guy who's reaching the end zone, everybody is just grabbing hold of each other. I'm talking both sides here, which is part of the reason it's not getting called. But like it's just a free-for-all of pass interference in every direction. And you're like, the rules don't change. Like, it's still illegal to do all of this. Why have we decided that just because it's pass interference in the highest leverage play of the game, we don't want to call it?
Yeah, Kate Otten had two dudes that were just like draped all over him and basically tackled him to the ground. It is interesting. I guess maybe the enforcement is tied to, they always say like each side of the ball is entitled to their space and on a certain route, if you run into a defender or something like that, say, yeah, well, he's allowed to be there and occupy that territory. You can't just bowl him over. When guys are getting into the end zone, they're both already there, and then the ball gets thrown. Is it a matter of like, well, yeah, I mean, they're all standing still because they're trying to just box out,
right,
like getting a rebound for this Hail Mary, but are they allowed to jockey and throw elbows and whatever? But yeah, I mean, you could have called like three different DPIs or OPIs, I guess, on that particular Hail Mary. And like you said, it's like that was a game-deciding throw. But yeah, the funny thing is, if Godwin turns around a half second earlier, I think we're talking about a Buccaneers win. Got to give credit to Todd Bowles. Maybe the last coach I would expect to go for 2 down 8, but maybe someone in that building deserves credit as well. Jackie Davidson or someone who does some research there. Shout out to whoever made that decision go through.
It reminds me a lot of soccer where, when it's like a free kick and the ball's going into the box, like the laws of contact no longer apply, right? Just because if you did apply them, it would be a penalty, and they don't want to give a penalty. Like there's a degree to which there is an unwritten rule that if the situation is simply too high leverage, we're just going to disapply the rules. And that's what happens with Hail Marys. It's like, if we get involved in this, the officials determine the outcome of the game effectively, right? It goes from being a Hail Mary, an almost 0% chance of winning, to we're giving you the ball at the 1 with 1 play left to win the game, which is at the minimum like a 50-50 chance to win the game. The officials simply do not want to make that call. And soccer is the same thing, right? In the box, during a free kick, contact happens that anywhere else on the field is an immediate free kick. We're not even talking about it. It's obvious, right? The guy has got 2 arms around him and is wrestling him to the ground. That's a clear and obvious free kick. But it's just before a free kick in the penalty area, and if we call it that, we're giving that team a penalty, and we don't want to do that because that changes the outcome of the game. I understand why, and I do agree with the idea that nobody wants the officials determining the outcome of games. But I feel like we've let it go too far in the other direction where it's prison rules on these plays, and that's not good either.
Yeah, there has to be a line to a degree. I feel like maybe end of the first half, they probably are more willing to, because like you said, they're not just determining the outcome of the game in theory if they do it at halftime, as opposed to, the final play. There could have been an untimed down last night, I suppose. But yeah, last night I think was one of the more egregious I've seen. But I think, like you said, if you watch the play back, like it was both sides. Like I think Mike Evans was on the ground, but I think he took 2 Bills defenders down to the ground with him in the back of the end zone too. So it was just chaos and mayhem on that last play.
But that's like, I think that's a product of this like free-for-all attitude, which is what it does is means everyone gets involved in it, right? And makes the entire thing just a ridiculous farce of wrestling before the ball arrives, which means it's never going to get caught by anybody because everyone's just getting rugby tackled to the ground and nobody's even paying attention to where the ball is. I feel like if you actually enforce the rules a little bit, it wouldn't be everybody doing it. It would be one guy doing it, and then you could actually penalize it properly, where penalize the one guy that's tackling somebody when everyone else is at least theoretically trying to do what they're supposed to do. When you don't call anything, everybody's going to start doing it because now you've basically just signaled that pass interference doesn't apply on this play. So go nuts.
I guess maybe part of it too is, in the NFL game, obviously it's going to be a spot foul, whereas in college, it's still just a 15-yard enforcement. So, and a Hail Mary is basically guaranteed to be a 50-plus yard penalty if you do call a DPI. So, yeah, I don't know. It's maybe something I look at. Who knows? But it is. The last night was pretty absurd how bad it got in the end zone.
The K. Doughton part is funny. Like I'm looking at the replay now, and he has two guys literally just grab hold of him and stop him going into the end zone. I mean, read any definition of pass interference, like impeding the receiver, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't get much more of a dictionary definition than two guys literally grabbing hold of him and preventing him from getting into the end zone. Like that is as clear a pass interference as you can get by any definition of it. See, I like these shows, Brad, where you're on because we get a chance to talk about stuff like this, where Steve wants no part of discussing officials in any capacity ever. So we have to take these opportunities where we can get them. Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about the trade deadline before we get into the injury breakdown later in the show. But first, we got to tell you about securing your family's financial future, starting with life insurance. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it quick, easy, and affordable to protect your family so you can get back to enjoying life. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a high-quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online and on your schedule. You can go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. MEET fabric.com/PFFNFL. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, Brad, the trade deadline is approaching. So we've already seen some movement. Kevin Byard going to the Eagles. Obviously, we talked about that earlier in the week. So let's start with the first question. When is the trade deadline? And then how much activity do you anticipate?
Yeah, so the trade deadline is Tuesday, Halloween, October 31st. Every deal's got to be done before 4 p.m. Eastern. Sometimes we get some buzzer beaters we don't hear about until 4:05, but they obviously, are consummated by the teams before that. But unfortunately, after last year, we had 10 trades the week before the deadline. We had some blockbusters with, Bradley Chubb and Christian McCaffrey and, big TJ Hawkinson, etc. I thought we might get the same thing. There was a clear delineation between the good teams and the bad teams. I think with all the 1 in 5 teams, I think went 4-1 this past weekend. Then you had Minnesota beat San Francisco. I don't think it's going to be super active. The big names I'm keeping an eye on still are the guys in Washington. One of those two edge defenders. I do think one of them is going to get moved. And then I guess Derrick Henry in Tennessee maybe. But I think that the results Sunday are going to matter in a lot of games.
Okay. So how many teams do you anticipate being sellers effectively at the trade deadline?
Tennessee probably still the biggest one. We obviously know already Kevin Byard, like you said, has moved. The Washington thing is just a unique circumstance where they cannot retain both players because of one franchise tag, 2 pending free agents. So I don't know if I'd call them a seller overall. I think it's just a unique situation where you'd be dumb not to get more than a compensatory pick. And then the rest I think will be smaller, but if the Giants lose, they move like a Paris Campbell. If Minnesota loses, do they make a smaller move? I still don't really buy it. I think that win kind of changed everything. And if they win and are 500 and 2-0 in their division, I don't think they're selling anything.
Right.
Who else is bad? Chicago, I don't think is going to sell.
Does Carolina get involved in shipping off Brian Burns because they stink and he's their first-round pick if they want one?
They probably should, but I don't think they're going to. The sense I get is he's going to stick around. They'll try to continue to find a way to work out an extension after placing the franchise tag is my guess. I think there was a report from someone like they're not going to trade him. I haven't heard that personally, but it's kind of the sense I get as well. But yeah, and then it gets smaller. But I do think all of these competitive teams, I don't think Philly is done. I don't think San Francisco can be ruled out for making a move. They've cleared a ton of cap space for more for carryover, but I think they would be open to making a move. Cleveland and Baltimore, all these running back injuries. Are they the Henry teams? Are they in the Dalvin Cook market potentially? I think is interesting. So, yeah, it's just like when I say there's going to be not movement, I think it'd be smaller moves, but the two guys I mentioned are, three, I guess, with Washington being a duo, maybe DeAndre Hopkins, in Tennessee. But I think the rest is going to be your Terrace Marshalls, your Paris Campbells, your Hunter Renfros, like your Carl Lawsons. Good players, sure. But I wouldn't characterize those as blockbusters if they do happen.
In a general sense, are these trades driven by the buying teams or the selling teams, or is there just no generalization to be made? Like, it feels like actually we tend to frame this in terms of, these bad teams are now, it's a fire sale, right? For sale sign on the front lawn. We're getting rid of everything with value. We're shipping off anybody. We're getting draft picks. We're getting rid of cap space. But actually, it's more a case of like a team that has a weakness or has lost a guy to injury or has a space for something, or, there's an obvious potential area. Those guys are out shopping, right? They're looking for a player that could come in and potentially fix a problem spot or give them some depth in an area that's now an issue, or potentially a team that, is better than they thought they were going to be and needs to sort of cement that over the course of the season. Is that the right dynamic, or is it just case by case? It's random.
It is case by case, but I would lean more towards like sellers making it clear a guy is available again. And there's always this kind of like everyone freaks out. Are they shopping him, or are they just answering the phone? There's always kind of silly, like jargon of what exactly is happening. But I would say it's more seller driven. I even mentioned Denver. Obviously, I think it's clear one of those receivers could be on the move as well. Maybe Josie Jewell at linebacker. I don't think Patrick Surtain gets moved. I feel like Justin Simmons was maybe a Philadelphia candidate. I don't know who else needs a great safety in his caliber. Garrett Bowles keeps getting mentioned, but he's a very good tackle. He's 31 years old. I don't know why you would trade that piece. I know he's mentioned some frustration, but I would say it's more seller driven. I would, but again, I think that we hear the word shopping and we think that teams are like, hey, please take this guy off our hands.
Right.
That's not what it is. It's like, hey, if you wanted him, if you're interested, we could find a middle ground and part ways with this player.
This is all like it's all sort of regulated. There's no system for this, right? It's just sort of teams putting it out there. Like, I feel like the NFL is kind of missing a trick here. We could create a thing around this. We could have like a designation, right? This guy is on the transfer list. This guy is on the we're open to phone calls list. This guy is on the not in a million years forget about it list, right? Let's start putting these guys in actual firm, designated, publicly available buckets and create like a whole drama around this thing.
I would say, as fun as that is, and sounds like a fantasy thing where you throw on like on my trade block.
Right.
I'll say this too, and it ties into, not to get on a soapbox, but like all the rumor accounts that just pump out absolute garbage, like it gets into buildings, and these GMs have to like talk to players and be like, hey, I won't name one of the many that you all know who I'm referring to. Is this report actually real? Are you guys they have to say no, like. And it causes serious problems, and they have to manage these relationships that, yeah, it's part of their job, but it's derived from absolutely nothing in reality. So I think that's probably more what it speaks to, is if a player caught wind that he was on the hey, I'm available list, he'd probably get pretty pissed off, which I think is understandable. So yeah, that's why I think that wouldn't be a thing. But I get it. Yeah, like you said, transfer portal type approach. In theory, I don't hate the idea.
It kind of feels though that we're already there. Like they're already fighting these fires that may not even exist because of these accounts you're talking about and because of the rumor mill and everything. Like people assume it's happening anyway, and if they assume it's happening, they're probably talking about it and reporting it, which means it's getting back to them. Now, the only thing they have in their favor at the moment is the plausible deniability and being able to lie. Like say, no, you're not on the trade block. We're not listening to phone calls. If you'll excuse me, I have call waiting on the other line, but it's not relevant to you. Don't worry about it, right? Like that goes out the window if you actually do formalize the system and he's right there on the list saying, I'm listening to phone calls for you.
Yeah, no, for sure. I would just say, and every building is, of course, different, but my perception, again, I'm not, when you see all these various accounts, I think if you don't know a top 3 person in a building, so that's GM, assistant GM, and maybe head coach in some cases or whatever, odds are you're not even getting correct information. So it's like these random dudes that have hashtag sources and know these things and know these trades are close and yada yada. Hey, credit to them. Maybe they know some GM somehow, some way. I'm a little skeptical that's the case.
All right, let's talk about some of the biggest names and where they might actually end up. I'm fascinated by Derrick Henry, first and foremost. Obviously, the Titans put the for sale sign on the franchise. They're looking to ship pieces away. They already did it with Kevin Byard. Derrick Henry is one of the obvious candidates to be moved. And Derrick Henry, for his career, has been as outlier a running back as you get in today's NFL in terms of most of the rules don't seem to apply to him, right? All the things we think we know about running backs don't seem to impact Derrick Henry. And that's relevant because, he's 29 years old. He's got a reasonably sizable contract attached to him, and these are things that would ordinarily make teams run for the hills and not want any part of this. But is Derrick Henry's history and the fact that he's always been an outlier going to make more teams interested in Derrick Henry than you would normally expect?
I think so. I think it has to, right? Like I, put out a video about some of my top candidates, and like you said, everyone's expecting the wheels to fall off. And even just looking at the last couple of years, he's still one of the elites at the position. But you mentioned the contract. He has a $10.5 million salary this year, the final year of his deal. I think Tennessee would have to eat a decent chunk, if not all of that. The trend we've kind of seen across the NFL now, where the incumbent team converts a bunch of the salary, makes it cheaper. They, in turn, do get a better draft pick, as a result. But I would imagine the teams that are calling there would ask Tennessee to do that, and maybe they are open to doing it and getting better draft capital, because that's really, I think what the key should be for them. Rather, save a couple $1 million is not as important as getting maybe, a third-round pick, whatever. I think the AFC North teams are the ones to watch here that we mentioned, just because there are so many injuries in Baltimore and Cleveland. It always helps when you have two competitive teams that are trying to beat each other, maybe in the market for the same player. We, of course, know about last year when the Chicago Bears beat out the Green Bay Packers for Chase Claypool's services. Obviously didn't go too great, but yeah, so I would keep an eye on them. It just makes the most sense to me. And they certainly, both those teams are top 5 in cash spending. They probably would need the conversion from the Tennessee side.
If that part is happening, the cash conversion, so that it becomes a relatively cheap deal for somebody to pick up, doesn't Buffalo scream like Derrick Henry? I mean, we saw Derrick Henry could be what Latavius Murray was supposed to be in that game and wasn't able to be, right? Like a guy that's actually the power back, picking up tough yardage so that you don't have to run Josh Allen into the teeth of defenses the whole time. Like Derrick Henry, and lost in all this, right? Titans have a garbage offensive line. They're not good. Derrick Henry is still Derrick Henry. I mean, he's looked pretty damn good despite running behind a bad offensive line. I feel like you put Derrick Henry in any of these teams, he looks pretty awesome.
I think the one question with Buffalo is, and Henry, I think it's a pretty crazy story. Like when he was early on, not playing a ton, even though he was a second-round pick, and they almost apparently traded him or moved on. And a teammate, I forget who it was like, you got to give this guy 20-plus carries and let him work his way into a game. Right. And I think a lot of running backs say that. Dalvin said it yesterday. I'm not sure. I think that's the issue for him in New York right now, but with all due respect. But with Henry, I think it's true.
It has been. That's the thing.
Is Buffalo doing that an efficient approach to their offense is kind of my question.
Yeah, no, that's the crazy thing. It's like all the cliches that were always thrown about with running backs. You get stronger in the fourth quarter. You need to give him 25 touches, all this kind of stuff. Statistically, it's crap for every running back in the NFL except Derrick Henry, where there actually is evidence to say the dude gets stronger in the fourth quarter. The more carries you give him, the harder he runs, the better production you get. All of the sort of crazy things, the rules that apply to running backs do not seem to apply to Derrick Henry. He is this weird, unique case. I think that's a fair point, though, that I don't know if Buffalo is set up to give him the kind of workload that would best maximize him, whereas, Baltimore or Cleveland certainly are better set up for that.
Yeah, no, that's the only point there. But yeah, I mean, they did. Everyone kind of had their Windhorst, thing go on when they restructured a contract last week with Deion Dawkins. I'm always the boring wet blanket. They had less than $1 million in cap space. They needed that just to operate. But maybe they do. Maybe they do. Big win last night, going into a mini bye. Maybe they make a move. But I also think for them, I mean, you're starting Josh Norman at corner now. I think you probably have other positions you might want to address besides, adding a running back. And James Cook's been better this year than last year.
Yeah, no, he's looked good. I want to pitch you, before we get on to the Washington edge rushers, I want to pitch you my idea which I've been told is dumb by two separate people. I'm going to take a swing at you and basically see if I can find somebody that backs me up. The Carolina Panthers should trade for DeAndre Hopkins because it's cheap, right? They paid him the money. He's getting paid nothing, essentially, for the rest of this year. They desperately need a number one wide receiver, any receiver that Bryce Young can have some confidence in. I think it makes everything better this year, and it doesn't mean it's irrelevant that it's not a long-term deal because right now your single driving force, if you're Carolina, should be ensuring that Bryce Young does not get damaged by this year. And I feel like if I'm wrong and actually him playing badly this year has no relevance whatsoever in year 2, 3, 4, all it did is cost you like a mid-round draft pick. If I'm right and it's actually important that he doesn't sink and drown this year, then for the cost of a mid-round draft pick and nothing else, you potentially saved your franchise quarterback.
You found a supporter. Yeah, I don't think you're dumb at all. We got Who called you dumb? Steve?
Steve
GM Steve
and Rick Spielman called me dumb.
Well, that's going to happen. That's bound to happen. Rick Spielman thinks a lot of people are dumb, and he was successful for a very long time, so he's built up the cachet to say that. But yeah, I hear you. Where look, they obviously don't have a first round pick, and maybe don't want to give up if it's a fourth or less, then I say go for it. If I'm them, you can't give up a third. You're not going to get a second for DeAndre Hopkins, but. Right. But yeah, I mean, I do think building confidence in a young quarterback, you bring a guy who, played at Clemson in DeAndre Hopkins, so has connections to the Carolina area. Yeah, and like you said, they already paid him about a $10 million signing bonus, so you're bringing in a near minimum contract, and then you figure out next year as you go forward. I don't hate the idea. It's not about contending. It's just about make sure Bryce Young goes into year 2 feeling good about himself. That's worth a fourth-round pick in my mind.
Yeah, and not just that, but being functional. If that allows Bryce Young to operate for the rest of this year, I think it's relevant. I was pitching this idea in the offseason when you would have had to sign him for more money and yada yada, and Panthers fans were mad because they were like, look, he's old, he's not going to be good by the time Bryce Young's good. It's not about them syncing up in their careers. It's about year 1 and 2 for Bryce Young. The guy needs to be able to function, and we've seen with the current setup, he can't really. This is why I was talking about signing DeAndre Hopkins in the offseason, because I think he would let him be operational right now and have somewhere to go with the ball and at least maybe learn and develop in a bad situation. Without that, I don't know that he's developing at all, and potentially you're actually damaging him and harming his development by not letting him grow and get better and operate during the course of the season. So maybe it was a better deal when you didn't have to give up a draft pick to make it happen in the offseason, but because the money's been paid and it's cheaper now than it was in the offseason, it's just costing you a draft pick instead. So either way, I still think it's a good deal. They should go do it.
Yeah, I don't hate it. Or maybe, explore Cortland Sutton, different kind of player, but, a big body contested catch type guy that can, again, just build some trust, build some some faith in Bryce Young, and he's not, has 3 years left on his deal, and maybe you give up less draft capital there because it's not converted, you take on a bigger salary. But yeah, I mean, Carolina has been trading away picks and eating bad contracts for 5 years, and it made absolutely zero sense from basically 2019 through this year. If you're ever going to do it, now would be the time when you're not just cycling through journeyman quarterbacks and you have a rookie contract guy. I don't hate it. You're not dumb. Sam.
Thank you. Sometimes it's just important to hear that.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the Washington duo, Montez Sweat and Chase Young. I saw a report saying teams have been calling about Sweat but not Young. Is that what you're also hearing, or are both of them essentially equally likely to get moved?
I think either one could get moved. I think that the report from Nikki Javala, who does great work, I think, for the Washington Post, was that only Sweat had received an actual offer, whereas Young, they probably had phone calls, but no offer had been made. I do know that offers have been made for Montez Sweat, and I don't know personally that offers have been made for Chase Young, so I guess I have heard the same. I think there are a handful of teams that probably would be interested in either player. It's interesting, right? So look at it. So Sweat obviously has been healthier, more durable throughout his career. I think has a higher floor. But Chase Young, I mean, inarguably has a higher ceiling. Is top 10 for us in pass rush win rate, pressure rate. Is now playing. It's not on a limited snap count. Like we've been saying that forever. But when he's been playing, 300 snaps a season, he's now getting a full workload and still looking dominant on a snap to snap basis. My estimation is Washington probably wants to get blown away with an offer here, but teams realize you don't really have leverage like we talked about. Like, why would I send you a first-round pick for either guy?
Right.
And I think that might be what holds up, either move getting done. And then again, if they beat Philly, probably don't do it. If they lose to Philly, maybe they're like, all right, let's just move a guy and get smart here.
Where do you think makes sense for either one of them to land?
I think Atlanta's interesting just because I think their edge rush group for us is bottom 5 in pressure rate and pass rush win rate right now, and their defense is awesome. And that's without having a consistent pass rush presence off the edge. You have the rookie contract quarterback. You have all your weapons are on rookie contracts as well. Good offensive line. That's, all I think on solid deals. So maybe they get in the mix there, win the division, once and for all and kind of, build some momentum going forward. Look, the Niners did not play well at all against Minnesota, could barely generate any pressure, and we know they love defensive line and are never afraid to make a move there. I think Chicago still could be in the mix here. Why not try to go out and get an edge rusher that, probably the worst unit on their team. Ngakoue is like the one guy who's gotten pressure. He's on a 1-year, expiring deal. So those teams make sense. Jacksonville, I still think makes sense. Baltimore, I guess, but yeah, Jacksonville and those other contenders that need pass rush, I think makes sense as well.
What about Detroit? Imagine Detroit with a viable alternative to Aiden Hutchinson rather than relying on Hutchinson being the only source of pressure, particularly if this is a team that does believe in themselves and thinks they're going to be playing deep into January, into February even. That's the kind of move that can move the needle, right? Like right now, if somebody shuts down Aiden Hutchinson, they don't have pass rush. If you bring in a Montez Sweat or a Chase Young for the other side, that's a different deal.
Oh, 100%. Great shout. And I think they would also fit in terms of, good run defender for Montez Sweat. Young's pretty good against the run too, but, solidify the entirety of that defensive line, which has fun pieces and good pieces. But like right now, it's Aleem McNeil and Aiden Hutchinson and then rotational players, right? So you bring another legit dude. I'll throw one more in too. The Houston Texans are 3-3 with an awesome rookie contract quarterback with an awesome Will Anderson Jr. And opposite of Will Anderson, there's nothing really to speak of on that defensive line. Maybe they are buyers and think they have something cooking there as well. Kind of like Detroit, like you said, that's really, we think we're close and this could push, propel us to higher heights.
Or even Houston aren't necessarily the we think we're close type of team, but once you've decided you're in a good spot of, hey, we got it right, we got the quarterback, we got the coach, we're in the right direction. At that point, there's value in just making sure you don't miss on the player that you got to bring in. So the next wave is all about, okay, we've the foundations are good, now let's start adding pieces. So you do that by the draft, but if you screw up one of those picks, you set yourself back. You take a step in the wrong direction or a sideways step at minimum. I think there's value in, instead of taking whatever this pick is and spending it on an edge rusher who now needs to be good, otherwise we screwed up, go give it for a guy who's already good. And now, all right, it's going to cost you a bit more, but you're still taking a step forward. You're not running the risk of taking a step backwards.
Yeah, and because the financial component, I know you meant cost more, from maybe a trade pick standpoint, but also you're going to have 3 cheap years at minimum of, your second and third overall pick. Now is the time to spend on other positions. Spend a receiver, maybe make a move there. You obviously have, an offensive line that's all making money at this point. But yeah, no, I think it makes all the sense in the world to spend a bit more on this defense. I mean, DeMeco Ryans has shown he can make a whole lot and, out of the talent they have. So can Bobby Slowick on offense. Get him some high floor, like you said, kind of. There's never a sure thing, that, but because you have good rookie contract players, I think you do have the ability to take some of those risks.
All right, anybody else you think we need to talk about before we head over to Vic and the Boo Boo Breakdown?
What about the receivers? Who do you think needs a receiver most? Let's say of the contenders, not like a Bryce Young situation, just who needs a boost, as a pass catcher?
Obviously, Kansas City's receiving core hasn't been good, but the emergence of Rashee Rice, the fact that Travis Kelce is their number one guy anyway, I don't know that they need to make a move happen. If they're sort of on the other end of the phone call spectrum, right? Like if somebody phones them with an offer that is too good to turn down, maybe they make a move, but I don't know that they're actively phoning around trying to get a Jerry Jeudy or a Cortland Sutton or whoever. Like I don't know that they need to make that kind of move. Who else would be in that list? I still feel like because of the injuries and the lack of consistency, like Baltimore could do with a receiver. Like when they're all out there, all playing at their peak, it's a good group. But like that's happened maybe 1 or 2 games so far this season. If them getting reinforcements, I certainly don't think would hurt. Who else would I definitely think is in need of a receiver? Honestly, there's not too many teams.
I would just throw in, I don't know if they're interested at all. It's early, but like I'm starting to get worried about the long-term viability of Jameson Williams in Detroit and if he's actually going to be a thing or not. And Josh Reynolds is playing the best football of his career maybe right now. He's obviously got great chemistry with Jared Goff, but and Sam Laporta is one of the best young tight ends we've ever seen. But if they don't have a lot of confidence in Williams, like maybe they go out and get an outside receiver, a different skill set than the tight end and Amon-Ra. I don't know. Maybe it could make sense because it's just there's no consistency to speak of whatsoever there right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably right to be at least starting to get concerned. I don't know if it's enough to make a move at this point. I think Khalif Raymond can do some of the things Jameson Williams can as well. So they've kind of got a backup plan in house, and I just think it's probably too soon to give up on him, like which you would effectively be doing by bringing in someone else to do that skill set. So I get the concern. I doubt it's enough to make them make a move at this point, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, good point. The corner for them makes more sense maybe. A bunch of teams could probably use corner them, Pittsburgh, etc. But anyway, it's time for the Boo Boo Breakdown with Mr. Vic Troha.
Yeah, but before we get into that, we've got to say that this podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Now, for the Prize Picks, the masterful work by the great ZT, Zach Tantillo. What do we got for this week? Tony Pollard, more than 0.5 pass rush receiving touchdowns. That's, where's that? Dallas against the Rams. Adam Thielen, more than 65.5 receiving yards against the Houston Texans. Austin Eckler, more than 0.5 pass rush receiving touchdowns. And Kirk Cousins, more than 1.5 passing touchdowns. That is the Prize Picks majesty created by the great ZT. Let's see how he manages to do next week. What is Prize Picks? It's a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players like we just did, and if they'll go for more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. Prize Picks adds a ton of excitement to the sports viewing experience. Watch your progress update in real time, win up to 25 times your entry amount, and cash out your winnings with quick scoring, settling, and withdrawals. At Prize Picks, you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections. Prize Picks entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Prize Picks offers frequent discounts, bonuses, and other exciting offers. You can even pick in-game projections after a game has started, which includes halves, quarters, periods, and more. Go to prizepicks.com/PFFNFL and use the code PFFNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/PFFNFL and use code PFFNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's been the Prize Picks information during this, and now we'll head over to Vic for the Boo Boo Breakdown. All right, back in with us this Friday, as ever, to talk through injuries on the Boo Boo Breakdown, as it has been nicknamed, is our guy Vic Troha. How's it going, Vic?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
Not bad.
Good.
Not bad. So let's start this with the what will end up being a weekly segment on Deshaun Watson and his shoulder injury. They put him back in the game. He gets re-injured. He also gets potentially concussed at the time. They check him out for that. But it turns out, effectively, he's re-aggravated that injured shoulder, and this whole situation just seems to be getting sort of more and more bizarre. Like, now it seems that he is conventionally injured and definitely out and not playing because he has a shoulder injury. But it's not like it's a new shoulder injury. It's the same thing, and yet he's been medically cleared, as they've been saying, for weeks, and is only sort of, they threw him out there in such a fashion that, a handful of plays in, he's got re-injured.
Right. There is a very interesting dynamic to this whole thing. I mean, we mentioned before about how they thought it was a contusion at first, which wouldn't have lasted this long. Also, the dynamic of he is in a huge contract, a lot of pressure on him, and coming off of a shoulder injury like he had, I did expect him to be back. But then when more and more information came out, it was apparent that it was the rotator cuff. And we talked last week about the subscapularis muscle of his rotator cuff, which appears to be injured, is the one that they primarily recruit when you throw your arm across your body. Which also tells me that if it's pretty damaged to the point of where he was throwing ducks like he was last game, you know he's in pain. When he went out last game, and I initially saw the video, I was watching film and I said, this is definitely a concussion clearance. The concussion protocol and into the blue tent actually happened after they looked at his shoulder. I think that somebody called down, just said, hey, check him out for concussion. That's not even an issue. What really is an issue is that he's had ongoing rotator cuff inflammation where there's more damage than we thought. Seeing what I'm now expecting to be like a rotator cuff strain, and maybe even if there is a partial tear, I think he's going to be out for a little bit longer.
So is this... we keep talking about sort of this is now worse than we thought it was from the outside. Is this worse than they thought it was? Or like what? I don't understand the dynamics of what has been happening there, because from almost the outset, it has been a very weird messaging coming out from them, right? Like it's sounded a lot more benign than it certainly looks like it's actually been. And you had these weeks-long things of everybody going, well, he's been medically cleared, why isn't he playing? And that's how you get to these questions of, why, does he even want to be out there, right? And it's like that's come because of team messaging. If they'd come out from the outset and said, yeah, like he's damaged this muscle that's pretty critical to throwing a football, he's going to be out for a while and he'll be back when we can get him on the field, right? Nobody would be talking about this. It would just be another shoulder injury, and sure, it's been lingering maybe longer than we thought it would, but like they've created this whole shitstorm.
Right. And Sam, you and I know about team medical talk, right? Like where they might come out and give you the minimum, right? And I think at first, like when they said he had a contusion of his shoulder, maybe there was more that they knew and there was the minimum. But what I'm seeing now, because the fact that they actually cleared him to play and let him play, is they didn't know the severity of it.
Right.
They would never have put him out there if they would have thought the severity of him getting more injured in his rotator cuff, especially on a throwing arm. That just wouldn't have happened. So I do think that there was just a little bit of like a misdiagnosis, or maybe they just kind of overlooked it a little bit, considering that he was limited in practice. He was seen throwing in videos. So it's just one of those things that when he went in, it was clear that he was still bothered, clear he was still injured, and then Stefanski said, you're not going back in the game at all. So
is this something that could have been one thing, and then when the sort of the re-aggravation occurred, it actually did make it worse, as opposed to like it was one thing that became something else, rather than it's been the second problem all along?
Absolutely. It could have definitely been just something that made worse just after a couple throws or getting tackled. That was a hard thing about seeing him go to the sideline, is because he had multiple things they were dealing with, but clearly that was so aggravated to the point he couldn't go back in.
Okay, the other player I think that's worth spending a little bit of time on is Jalen Ramsey, who sounds like he's returning and could potentially even play this week, according to Adam Schefter, which apparently was news to Jalen Ramsey. But still, what we thought might keep him out for almost the entire season, I mean, the end of October, it looks like his return date.
Yeah, so when you have a meniscus repair, it doesn't necessarily tell you like how severe that was. For Jalen Ramsey to come back, I mean, yeah, this is great timing, but maybe we were just looking at something that was more on the lighter side of like a full tear. Like there's certain meniscus tears like a bucket handle and that are pretty severe, where he may have just not had a tear to that extreme. His rehab has clearly gone well, and they wouldn't put him out there if he wasn't able to sustain the loads of like really aggressive jumping and cutting, because as we mentioned in previous episodes, that a meniscus is like a cushion, so it is a shock absorber.
Right. So
especially when you're playing in a defensive back position, you are cutting, jumping, and running constantly. he knows that if his meniscus is able to handle that or not. So if he's already cleared to go, like, I don't see anything as far as like a setback for him, because they won't put him out there if he's not 100%.
And 100% is going to be, full Jalen Ramsey, or there's going to be a sort of an adjustment period of, you're physically fine, but you might take a while getting back to what you used to be.
Yeah, I would expect a little bit of an adjustment period, especially anybody who hurts their knee to the point of where you're going to have surgery. You have a little bit of that hesitation too, right? Like, you just have a little bit of you that's like, do I really trust this knee? Is it going to give out on me? Especially with meniscus injuries like that, sometimes it does feel like a player, they will report, it feels like it's giving out or collapsing. So he's just going to have to really gain that trust over the next couple weeks, and then he should be.
For something like that, does, once you've had the surgery and the repair and all that kind of thing, does the pain disappear? Like, it's done, and then so it's a mental thing. Like, you just don't trust the knee, but there's no actual pain there or anything.
Yeah, the pain's going to be relatively gone. Some of the pain that he might get, I mean, if there is a little bit of swelling or soreness after being on it, because you can't replicate in rehab what a full game is going to give you. So yeah, there can be some soreness and stuff there where you'd be really concerned if, like, he's feeling sharp, sudden pains when he's cutting and jumping every rep. So obviously they wouldn't put him in there if he had that, though.
Sure, but theoretically, like, at this point in his development, and they're like, okay, you're playing this weekend, I mean, he's not experiencing pain in that knee generally, like, at all.
Yep, just a little bit of soreness, and then I'd say afterwards they're going to do everything they can to just mitigate that pain and swelling and put him back out there.
All right, let's talk some big picture injury trends now that we've got, a chunk of the season underway. You were talking before we went on about how there seems to be more and more receivers in particular going deeper into their careers age-wise and not running into these injury issues that have typically become a problem once receivers reach a certain age.
Right, absolutely. So as wide receivers age and they hit about a 27 to 28 age range, it's interesting because you see them spike in their injuries in a given season. And so, like, if you take collectively wide receivers, only 48% of them in a season play every game. And average number of games is about 2 that are missed. But then when you get up to older, 27 or 26, I mean, older just respectively to that, basically you're about 80% of the people 27 or 28 or older miss 2 games. So, like, I mean, that number jumps like crazy. And it kind of falls into the line of, as you age, it's a big indicator of injury prediction. It's the more wear and tear on your body. But this year, it's really unique because, I mean, some of our top receivers have been very durable, and they're in that age range, and they're still performing at a high level. I mean, I'm looking at Tyreek Hill. He's 29. You have Devontae Adams, 30. Cooper Kupp is coming back, and now hopefully he's healthy after his hamstring stint. And then even like Stephon Diggs. These guys are playing at a really high rate at an older age, and it's just not really following the trend, which I thought is pretty interesting. I mean, you think about Devontae Adams, he's at almost 95% of his career games he's played. Diggs is 93, Hill is 83. Those are high numbers. They don't miss a lot, and that's kind of opposite of what the trends in history have shown.
All of them, though, with the exception of Diggs, I think, off the top of my head, have picked up injuries. Like, Devontae Adams battled through that shoulder injury. It just didn't put him out of the game. Tyreek Hill has been dealing with a few different things. He was on the injury report with a hip this week. So, like, they've picked up injuries. They just haven't actually been put out by them yet.
Exactly. And that's where, like, the huge difference is like, you see, like, people get banged up. One of my favorite quotes is that there's, Dr. Chow said that there's 6 medical personnel at every single game for a reason. Not because the injury report just shows, like, hey, there's only 3 people here that are hurt. Everybody's banged up, and you're just dealing with these minor things. So players like that who just know their body and they learn how to train through it, and they have limited practices and they can make it on Sundays. And that's what's really interesting about this, is because it's actually opposite of what the trends show in history. Like, these guys, they would be out multiple weeks. And I mean, I also look at people like Julio Jones. I think the over-under for him to get hurt is probably like one game. I mean, he was littered with injuries last year, but he's older. So, and that's just what I found was really interesting, because these players are just still playing at such an elite level.
And this is just a this year thing. This is not like a sort of trend in recent years.
Yeah, this year specifically, because in the past they have shown that, hey, you hit that 27, 28, 80% of those people in that age group are missing games. But the opposite is really strange, because, you know, when you're a running back at 27 or 28 years old, and you're still playing at a high level, you're in that elite status. You're like that Adrian Peterson status. And, you know, only, I'd say, 28% of running backs play every game in a given season, and they miss an average of like 3.3 games. But when the opposite of wide receivers, when you get to that upper age range, they actually really don't miss a lot of games. And I think it's because they're just those freak of natures.
Yeah, like it's like if you're still hanging around the NFL in your mid-30s, you're probably durable anyway.
Right.
Like Latavius Murray, I think they were saying last night, is the oldest running back in the NFL right now, and he's 33.
Yeah.
It's like they just don't play at that point. So if you're still around at that stage, it's probably because they know you're around. You know, they know you're going to be there every single week, even if you're not a great running back. They're confident at that point that, hey, at least he's going to be around every week, you know?
Right.
So
it's interesting, because like you see players like that who, as they hit that, I mean, later age, they also just know their body better. But this year, what we're seeing is a little bit of opposite of that, because I'm seeing CMC on that list, Nick Chubb, Eckler, James Conner, Raheem Mostert, Jamal Williams. All of these guys that fall into that category are actually getting hurt. So this year is just a little bit different as far as outliers between the running backs and wide receivers in that sense.
We talked about this maybe the first show we did with you at one point about injury proneness or otherwise, right? And how there are certain people that, you know, may not start off injury prone, but once they get that first one, it's going to keep going and keep going. What about the other end of the spectrum, where what is with people that seem bulletproof, like guys that are just built out of granite and will never get injured, no matter how much they play, no matter how long they go, no matter what happens to them, it's impossible to hurt certain people. Like, what the hell is with those people? And this isn't just a football thing. Like, I think all of us know somebody who is just like physically impenetrable and cannot be destroyed by anything, you know, like any kind of day-to-day walk of life thing that would leave any of us with like a, you know, broken ankle, or like they just shake it off and keep on trucking.
Right, those outlier statistics. I mean, the Joe Thomas, the Frank Gores, like all of these people who just are physically able to withstand so much. I don't know the science behind it. I mean, I would say half of it is just luck. Like they just didn't get hit this way or that way. The other half is they probably do the right things for their body, and they're freaking tough, and they can handle those bumps and bruises, and they just keep on grinding.
I was listening, I forget what the show was, but George Kittle was talking about how like at this point in his life, his week during the season is just football or recovery. And it just goes from one to the other, right? Like all of the time that he has that isn't being spent on football is being spent recovering from football.
Yep.
But even in that conversation, he was saying, but there are people that don't do that. And I don't know how they survive. Like there are guys that just don't, like he, you know, has spent a ton of money to get all this stuff in his house so that he can spend a little bit more time at home. But, you know, he's listing off like hyperbaric chambers and blah, blah, all the crap that he's doing. And he's like, but there are people that don't. And I do not understand how these people can get in a car crash every weekend and then just rock up, do practice, walkthroughs, lift, whatever. None of the recovery, you know, recuperation, rehabilitation stuff, and are fine. He's like, it doesn't make any sense to him. And that's professional athlete saying that as opposed to like one of us going, I don't know how that works.
Down the road, we're just going to find this like genetic trait of these people or some type of chromosome, and they're like, oh, you have this, that's why you're going to last.
You have this, you will be good. It's one of the things they're going to test for at the combine is, are you one of these bulletproof human beings that is never going to break no matter how much like physical trauma you're put under.
Right.
I mean, Brett Favre was clearly one of those guys. It's not that he never got injured, but it took a hell of a lot more to injure Brett Favre than it did other quarterbacks.
Yep, absolutely.
That guy was bulletproof for the majority of his career, and then eventually he hit 41 years old or whatever, and that stopped being a magic trick. But like the difference between a Brett Favre and a Tony Romo on that spectrum must be like two ends of the whole thing.
And sometimes it's just you can't explain. Like medically, I wish I knew the answer to that, but then you just have to tip your hat to these guys and be like, good for you. You played 15 seasons and barely missed a game.
Yeah, and that's like, it's not going to explain everything, but like one of the reasons Jerry Rice's numbers are in the stratosphere is because he very rarely got injured. I mean, he tore an ACL one time and missed like most of a season, but like Jerry Rice, generally speaking, played all the time and did it until he was 40 something, right? So his numbers are like 1.5 times anybody else's. And when you start projecting out, how long until Julio, whoever, gets to Jerry Rice, it's like, well, what you're not doing is factoring in what you talked about, that there's most of the time they're going to miss at least 2 games. If they're unlucky, they're going to miss more of those games. And so if it's 5 seasons, you probably have to think in terms of 6 or 7 because you're not even factoring in injuries, which are going to derail it all the way along.
Yeah, and I kind of laugh too because I think of then in the middle you have like people like Matthew Stafford, who's always injured, but he just is so tough. He plays through like a broken vertebrae too. So there's some of that dynamic, and there's like how much are these guys just pushing through pain in a game just to be on the field.
All right, anything else you want to hit before we wrap it up this week?
Well, I'm just another good week of football ahead of us, so I'm excited.
All right, let's go. That's it for the Boo Boo Breakdown and, in fact, the PFF NFL podcast this week. Thank you for watching, and we will be back on Monday.